There are mornings that arrive not with noise, but with a silence that feels heavier than sound. You wake up and everything is in its place. The bed, the mirror, the half-open curtain letting in the light. But something inside you feels off, like a song you once loved playing slightly out of tune. You go through the motions, coffee, conversation, the smile you wear like clothing, but underneath it all is a quiet question you can't seem to answer. Why does life still feel so unfinished? Why does peace still feel so far? You've read the books, attended the workshops, and set the intentions. You've tried to stay positive, to move on, to forgive, to manifest. Yet here you are, again, pulled back into the same emotional spiral that you thought you'd outgrown. Perhaps it shows up as self-doubt that stalks you in your highest moments. Or maybe it's the fear of being seen, even when you crave connection. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the feeling that you're performing life instead of living it. Carl Jung believed that much of our suffering comes not from external events, but from the unseen forces within us. The wounds we've forgotten, the emotions we've buried, the parts of ourselves we've tried to exile. These are not just psychological memories. They are psychic imprints, silently guiding our reactions, decisions, and patterns. You may think you're choosing freely, but if the past remains unhealed, it becomes the map beneath your every step. And for those who feel deeply, for the empathic souls who absorb the pain of others like air, this burden becomes even more complex. Empathy, Jung might argue, is not merely a gift. It is a spiritual frequency that, when unconscious, can become a trap. You feel everything, but cannot explain why. You give endlessly, but feel empty. You listen to others, but can no longer hear yourself. Without discernment, empathy can quietly become a wound disguised as virtue. So much of what you call you may not be you at all. It may be a patchwork of unprocessed sorrow, ancestral memory, and emotional inheritance, the mask you wear to be loved. The silence you learn to survive. The smile you perform to avoid being questioned. All of it held together by something fragile, yet powerful, the wounded inner child. And until that child is seen, not as weak or broken, but as sacred and alive, the cycle continues. So ask yourself gently, not as an accusation but as an invitation, who is really making your choices? Who is behind the fear, the people-pleasing, the constant seeking? The answer may not come quickly, but it will come from within. Because the journey to liberation doesn't begin with answers. It begins with noticing the questions that never stopped whispering. And if the wounds are still steering your life, perhaps it is not because you're failing, but because your soul is finally ready to remember, ready to return, ready to awaken. The question now is not whether something is wrong with you. The real question is this: who within you is still waiting to be heard? There are moments when you betray yourself so quietly you barely notice. You agree to things you don't want. You laugh when your heart isn't light. You hold your tongue even when your truth trembles to be spoken. These aren't decisions made by the calm, conscious adult in you. They are reflexes, shaped long ago by a child who learned that love was conditional and belonging came at the cost of authenticity. Carl Jung called these inner distortions complexes, clusters of forgotten emotions and unresolved experiences that continue to steer your behavior from the shadows. Though you may not remember the wound, your nervous system does. Your voice hesitates, your chest tightens. You smile out of habit, not joy. At the heart of every self-abandonment is a silent cry that was never answered. The inner child, still alive, still watching, tenses each time you sense disapproval. When the world feels too loud, too critical, or too unfamiliar, that child pulls the reins. Not because you're weak, but because your younger self once believed silence kept you safe. And even now, decades later, your nervous system still honors that ancient vow. Stay small. Don't upset anyone. Make them love you. Be good. Imagine this: a grown woman stands at a work meeting, her ideas brilliant but her voice barely audible. She rehearsed for hours, yet when the time came, her throat closed. Or the man who wants to say no, who feels exhausted and depleted, but instead nods and agrees, then later feels resentment he cannot explain. These are not failures of will, they are inherited emotional reflexes, rooted in a time when speaking up meant punishment or love withdrawn, and the psyche remembers. It remembers everything. This is not just memory, it is muscle. It is a sensation, it is the body's loyal attempt to protect what once felt fragile. But in protecting that child, you unconsciously sacrifice the adult. You forfeit choice for familiarity, truth for approval. You live, not from the present, but from a ghost script written in the early chapters of your life. And this script doesn't shout. It whispers in your choices, your fears, and your people-pleasing. It turns your life into a loop, replaying scenes until you realize the child is still running the show. But here lies the deeper insight. The inner child doesn't need to be silenced, exiled, or fixed. It needs to be heard. Behind its frozen fear is also your original fire, the raw, unfiltered, untamed essence of who you were before the world taught you to split yourself in two. To heal is not to suppress that child, but to turn toward them, to listen without judgment, to whisper back, "I see you now." And yet, to truly meet that child, you must also be willing to face the part of yourself that has kept them hidden, the part that stores not only your pain, but your power, the part Jung named the shadow, the exile, the keeper of all you've tried to deny. There is a part of you that walks beside you always, but never speaks unless provoked. A presence just beyond the reach of your daily awareness. It is the side of you that clenches its jaw when kindness feels fake, that flinches at praise, that secretly fears love will always leave. This is not your weakness. It is not your fault. It is your shadow. Carl Jung called it the unconscious counterpart of the conscious self, the exile, who carries all the feelings you were taught to banish. Rage, envy, deep-rooted shame, the ache of never feeling enough. They live in this dark twin of your soul, not to sabotage you, but because at some point you learned they made you unlovable. You avoid this part of yourself not with words, but with performance. You become pleasant, you become reliable, you become who they need you to be. And the more perfect you become, the more the shadow grows hungry in silence. But what is repressed does not vanish, it waits, it watches, it burrows deeper until one day it slips through the cracks. Not during tragedy or loss, but in something so small it seems absurd. A forgotten text, a tone of voice, a friend who chooses someone else. Suddenly your heart races, your vision narrows, and your mouth says things you didn't know you were holding. And then the shame returns. You apologize. You swallow it down again, but something inside you whispers, louder this time, "I'm still here." Consider a moment. A woman, always composed, always generous, finds herself at dinner with her partner. He glances at his phone for too long. She feels herself shatter inside. Her voice trembles. Her tone sharpens. She accuses, then recoils. It's not about the phone. It's about the old fear rising from the depths of her exile. The fear of being unimportant, replaceable, invisible. She doesn't understand the sudden storm, but her shadow does. It's the 7-year-old who watched her father choose absence over affection, who learned that attention is currency and silence means she doesn't matter. That child never stopped waiting for someone to choose her. Now, every minor neglect feels like that original abandonment returning. This is how the shadow moves, through echoes. It does not scream, it reenacts. It calls not for punishment, but for reunion. And yet so few ever look it in the eyes. Because to face your shadow is to admit you are not only what you present to the world, but also what you've spent decades denying. It is to see your anger not as sin, but as sorrow. Your jealousy is not as poison, but as proof of longing. Your shame is not as evidence of failure, but as the residue of stories where love was withheld. And still, something in you resists. Because what if you open the door and find a monster? But here's the paradox. The moment you face it, it no longer needs to haunt you. The monster becomes a mirror, the rage becomes grief, the jealousy becomes a hunger for your own worth, the shame becomes your buried innocence, begging not to be erased but reclaimed. When you no longer run from the dark, you become luminous in a way no mask can replicate. This is the quiet power of integration. To welcome your shadow is to reclaim the fragments of your soul scattered by fear. It is the beginning of wholeness. But if you do not listen to the message in your reflection, the body will take over. The soul always finds a way to speak, and when the mind refuses, it is the body that becomes the altar where truth demands to be heard. You may believe the past is behind you, that what happened decades ago has no bearing on who you are today, but your body knows otherwise. Beneath the surface of daily routine, while you cook, speak, walk, or try to fall asleep, your body carries the echoes of moments you no longer remember but never fully survived. Carl Jung believed that the body holds what the psyche cannot face, and so, what the mind forgets, the chest tightens. What the voice denies, the back aches. What the heart suppresses, the gut churns. Pain becomes a language the soul uses when silence has gone on too long. There is a strange intimacy in physical discomfort. It's not loud like grief or sharp like anger. It's dull, persistent, familiar. You may call it stress. You may say it's just age, just fatigue. But sometimes the pain in your body is not a condition to fix, but a story to listen to. The heart that races in social situations may be remembering the sting of childhood ridicule. The shoulders that never relax might still be bracing for a father's unpredictable tone. The sleepless nights may not be about caffeine or screens, but about a nervous system that never truly felt safe to rest. Imagine a man in his late 40s who feels an inexplicable dread every Sunday evening. By all accounts, his life is stable. He has a job, a family, and even moments of joy. Yet as the sun sets and Monday draws near, a pressure builds in his chest like an invisible hand tightening. Doctors find nothing. Meditation helps, but never fully soothes. It is only in a quiet therapy room, years later, that the truth surfaces. Sundays were the nights his childhood home would fall silent before the storm. He would lie awake, listening for the shift in footsteps, the tension in voices, the door that might slam. His body never stopped listening. Even now, decades later, the threat is gone. But his chest never got the memo. The body does not use language. It uses sensation, rhythm, and resistance. Its wisdom is primal and precise. It keeps score not to punish you, but to preserve you. And in this way, your body becomes the final vessel for your unlived pain. The tears you never cried have become your migraines. The truths you never spoke now live in your throat. The boundaries you never set ache in your spine. This is not weakness, it is memory, encoded in muscle and nerve. And yet, most of us have been trained to override it. We reach for a pill, a distraction, another coffee. We say, "I'm just tired," or "it's nothing." But deep down, we know. We feel the pressure behind the eyes, the weight in the chest, the tremble in the gut. These are not signs that you are broken. They are invitations. The body never lies, and it never gives up on you. It keeps knocking until you open the door and ask, "What are you trying to tell me?" This is where the healing begins, not in escape, but in embodiment, in placing a hand over the chest and saying, "I hear you now," in learning to interpret the pain not as an enemy, but as a messenger. And as you begin to listen, you begin to remember. Not just the sorrow, but the strength it took to carry it all this time. That strength is sacred, and yet even strength becomes a burden when it is unshared, which is why, when the body can no longer hold the weight of the unspoken, the psyche creates a new solution, a mask, a perfectly crafted persona to make sure no one sees the trembling underneath. By the time we reach adulthood, Many of us have become expert performers in the quiet theater of emotional survival. We've learned how to smile at the right time, nod politely, show resilience, and say, "I'm fine," even when something inside us is unraveling. Carl Jung called this mask the persona, a carefully crafted identity we create to meet the world's expectations. It's not false, but it's not whole either. It's a version of us shaped more by survival than truth. At first, it serves us well. It helps us belong, avoid conflict, and earn praise. But over the years, something sacred begins to fray. The mask, once protective, becomes suffocating. There is a deep and subtle loneliness that comes from living behind the persona. It is the ache of being praised for who you are not, the sorrow of succeeding in a role you never chose. You may receive admiration, recognition, even love, but it never quite reaches the part of you that is real, because it was never truly you that was seen. And, after a while, that unseen part begins to starve. It doesn't cry out loudly at first. It whispers through restless nights, through sudden tears while washing the dishes, through a quiet numbness that wraps around even your happiest moments. Take, for example, a woman in her early 50s who has spent her life being the strong one. She is the dependable sister, the hard-working professional, the nurturing mother. Her smile is radiant, her presence calming. But when she is alone, truly alone, she feels like a ghost in her own life. One afternoon, standing at the kitchen sink, her teenage son walks in, annoyed, slams a cupboard and mutters something cruel. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't respond. She says what she always says, "It's okay, I'm fine." But when the house is quiet again, her knees tremble, not from the words, but from the realization that she doesn't know how to feel them. She has mastered the art of enduring, but she has forgotten how to express. That moment is not unique. It is a quiet implosion that many feel when the persona is worn for too long. It is the moment when we realize the mask has fused to the skin, and yet, even then, we hesitate to take it off. Why? Because the persona is not just about appearance. It is tied to love, to safety, to belonging. As children, many of us learned that love was earned, not given. We became the peacekeeper, the achiever, the funny one, the caretaker. And while those roles may have kept us safe, they also taught us that our full selves were somehow too much, too messy, too inconvenient. So we learned to trim ourselves down to what others could digest, but the soul was never meant to live in fragments. The price of always appearing fine is the slow erosion of authenticity, and over time, the distance between who we are and who we pretend to be becomes unbearable. That is why even people who seem outwardly successful can feel deeply empty. It's not failure that wounds them, it's the disconnection from their inner truth. And yet, there comes a moment in everyone's life when the mask begins to crack, not because we are weak, but because life, in its strange mercy, demands honesty. Sometimes the trigger is loss, sometimes it is exhaustion, sometimes it is love. A person enters your life who sees beyond the mask. They ask, gently, "Are you okay?" And something in you breaks, not in pain, but in relief, because you realize you no longer want to be held together, you want to be held. That person becomes a mirror, and not a flattering one, but a sacred one. They reflect not the image you've presented, but the parts you've hidden. It is terrifying, it is liberating, it is the beginning of a different kind of relationship. One that does not revolve around performance, but presence. And through them, you begin to see that what you thought made you lovable, your perfection, your selflessness, your composure, was never the point. You were lovable all along, and that's when the deeper unraveling begins. Because love, real love, does not want your persona, it wants your truth. And that truth, buried under layers of coping and control, will now begin to rise. Not gently, not politely, but honestly, and with it comes everything you tried to hide, your grief, your anger, your longings. And the person closest to you, your partner, your friend, your child, may unknowingly pull those pieces forward, not to hurt you, but to free you. The question is, Will you fight to keep the mask on, or will you allow yourself to be seen? It is one of life's quiet ironies that the people we cherish most often become the ones who stir our deepest pain, not because they wish to wound us, but because love has a way of unlocking the vault. Carl Jung understood this mystery and named it projection. When we fall in love or form deep bonds, we unconsciously project fragments of ourselves, unmet needs, unresolved fears, unhealed wounds, onto the other. Suddenly, your partner's silence isn't just quiet, it feels like rejection. Their distraction isn't just absent-mindedness, it becomes abandonment. You find yourself triggered by the smallest things, responding with emotions far larger than the moment demands, and afterward you wonder, why did that feel so big? It felt big because it wasn't just about now, it was about then. In the mirror of a relationship, we see ourselves more clearly than we'd like, and not the curated mask we wear in public, but the raw, aching self beneath. That's the power of intimacy. It doesn't just expose the parts we love, but also the parts we've buried. Our shadow, our inner child, our false persona. And the closer someone gets, the more they reflect. You might think you're reacting to your partner's words, but what's really happening is much older. A forgotten memory, a silent belief, a wound that never healed. In these moments, the past lives again, wearing the face of someone present. There's a man in his early 40s who always feels on edge with his wife. She asks him, kindly, "Did you forget to take the trash out?" And his chest tightens, his voice rises, he snaps. Later, he feels ashamed. Why did he react like that? The question wasn't cruel. But deep inside him lives a boy who once felt like nothing he did was good enough. A boy whose father only noticed him when he failed. When his wife points out a small mistake, that boy hears, "You're failing again." And in that split second, he isn't responding to his wife. He's responding to a ghost. This is the hidden architecture of projection. We think we are having arguments about chores, about tone, about who's right. But beneath those surface conflicts are ancient scripts begging to be rewritten. Relationship becomes the arena where your inner child meets theirs, where your shadow dances with theirs, and where both of you are faced not only with each other but with yourselves. And this realization can be devastating because it strips away the comfort of blame. You can no longer say, "They make me feel this way," without also asking, "Why does this feeling live in me to begin with?" This is the uncomfortable threshold of real growth. It demands humility. It demands honesty. But most of all, it demands that we stop outsourcing our healing to other people's behavior. Yet hidden within this discomfort is a sacred opportunity. For when someone triggers us, they are not just causing pain. They are revealing where the wound is. Like a lantern illuminating the forest floor, they show us where we are still afraid, still guarded, still hurting. And if we can pause before reacting, just long enough to ask, what is this really about? We begin to reclaim power over our responses. We begin to listen not to the surface conflict, but to the buried voice underneath it. That voice may say, "I never felt safe," or "I always had to earn love," or "being myself was never enough." These are not flaws, these are invitations. Invitations to return to the place within you are still waiting to be seen. The place that no one else can heal for you because it was never their responsibility. It is yours. The deeper purpose of a relationship then is not just companionship. It is a revelation. It is a transformation. It is the mirror that makes the unconscious conscious. And while that mirror may sting, it also sets us free. Free to choose awareness over reaction. Free to replace blame with curiosity. Free to see the person in front of us not as an enemy, but as a sacred trigger guiding us back to ourselves. Because the truth is, when you stop needing others to fix what's broken inside you, love becomes something else. It becomes generous, spacious, whole. And that is the beginning of a new kind of intimacy, one rooted not in performance or projection, but in presence. One that doesn't just reflect your wounds, but your capacity to rise beyond them. There comes a moment, after the mirrors have shown us every hidden contour of our hurt, when the room grows still and no one is left to blame. In that hush, you feel another presence, small yet unwavering, watching from the edge of your awareness. It is the child you once were, carrying a bundle of forgotten feelings, waiting for you to notice. The instinct is to turn away, to slip back into the familiar armor of roles and routines, but something softer rises inside you now. Instead of retreating, you kneel. You meet the child's eyes. You let the ache move through you like rain through dry soil, and for the first time, the ground within begins to soften rather than crack. Healing, you discover, is not a staircase of constant ascent, but a spiral that brings you home by circling the places you tried to avoid. Each time the spiral returns, you bring a little more light, a little less judgment. You learn to place a hand over your racing heart and whisper, "I am here." You learn to sit with the tremor in your stomach and say, "I will not abandon you again." These gestures seem ordinary, almost too simple, yet they are the quiet mechanics of peace. In choosing presence over performance, you loosen the knots that have shaped your entire adult life. The body exhales, the shadow softens, the persona slips aside, and what remains is a steady pulse of truth that does not need applause to keep beating. Jung called this return the birth of the self. Not a future self you must construct, but the timeless essence that has been waiting just beneath the noise. When you stand in that essence, the world does not suddenly become easy, yet it no longer feels like an opponent. Challenges arise, and you respond from wholeness rather than fracture. Relationships reflect curiosity instead of projection. The child within no longer cries for rescue. Hand in hand with you, they explore. So when the old triggers circle back, as they will, remember the spiral. Pause, breathe, listen. Choose honesty over haste, compassion over control. Every act of gentle attention is a stone laid on the path that leads you deeper into your own heart. Walk it long enough, and one evening you may look up, surprised to find the sky wider, the wind kinder, and the silence no longer lonely, but alive. That is the quiet triumph of coming home. The moment you realize safety was never outside. It was the courage to stay with yourself all along. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home, or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here, in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation, that is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.